I feel like everyone is allowed one conspiracy theory.
Ooh, okay.
And I want to know, what is your personal conspiracy theory that you subscribe to?
Whales are aliens.
Whales are aliens?
We know I hate the ocean. They're too big for this world. Just hanging out down there.
I love that.
I
They're
mean, everything under
humongous.
the water is sort of like outer space.
I
Yeah.
love, like, it's another dimension down
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Well, or they just like that Star Trek movie.
We don't
They're
even
truly
know what's down there.
We don't.
Incredible. Incredible work. Yes.
It's very funny because it is so similar to yours.
Wow.
Cephalopod. Like, I think that squid and octopi.
Oh, don't no.
It's because their actual genetic makeup is not like anything else on the planet. The way they think is not traceable in the same way we study intelligence, and the way they evolve in real time is a different level of advancement. I straight up believe that squid and octopi are not from this earth.
Wow.
What's yours?
I am actually big on conspiracy theory. I'm like, which one is it mine? I do believe that water, like the ocean, the deep ocean, that there is like another dimension down there. Like there's something going on. You know who we don't know? The deep.
Yeah,
We've
like the
explored
Mariana
more of
Trench.
space than the ocean.
Yeah, so there's a portal down there.
Okay, all right.
That is my big
Portal, got it.
conspiracy. Yeah, yeah.
And that's where our animals come from, that portal.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
And that's why we're so close, you know? Welcome to the DC Studios Showcase. I'm Frankie Smith, nerd commentator.
I'm entertainment journalist Tyler Coates.
And every episode, we're joined by our comic correspondent, Coy Jandro.
I am so excited to talk marine-based life and comic books today.
I love it. Today, we have a huge episode. It's all about Watchmen. We have two special guests today. We have voice actor Katie Sackhoff and producer and director of Watchmen Chapter 1 and 2, Brandon Vietti. Let's get into Watchmen. Now, we
Okay.
talked about Watchmen last episode with you, and we talked about, like, there's so much we can get into because there's a whole culture into Watchmen.
Yeah, I've seen the Zack Snyder movie and I've seen the HBO series. I don't know if I've ever read the comic. I feel like I tried
Yes.
once when the Zack Snyder movie was coming out because I knew
Yes.
it was like
The
an important
comic-
piece of literature at this point.
I'm actually surprised that you haven't read the comic because you are the fanciest guy I know. And that is one of the fanciest comics, I think.
Okay.
It's very highbrow.
Yeah.
It's very pretentious, I feel like.
Oh, okay.
And I feel like whenever you want to be fancy, you're like, Alan Moore's Watchmen comic. I feel these. It's all about, looking into the archetypes of heroes. What does it mean to be a hero in the real world? And it's an incredible comic. It's very robust. Coy, when was it written?
It was written in the 80s, and I think it was the start of a very interesting transition into a darker era of comic books. Like, not only is it important today, but it changed comics then. I feel like it was one of those zeitgeist shifts where Watchmen came out and people were like, oh, we can do commentaries on the commentaries,
Right.
but through this really dark lens. And I think it, America was really affected by Reaganomics and certain things that this comic reflects. And I do think, to what Frankie's saying, it is one of the fanciest comics in that it was a pedigree. It was a much more, even scholars and people that think that comics are just pulp at least acknowledge Watchmen. Like, it's one of the things that escaped the crowd.
Yeah.
So I also love that it's a commentary on comic characters, and it's interesting to me that DC Comics has these characters in their canon when the Charlton comics, which DC bought in the 80s, that these characters were based on were kind of mirrors to each other. So like Night Owl was a bit of a commentary on the original 40s Blue Beetle, and that you can see when you know both characters that they're kind of nodding at each other. Captain Atom, who's got a great run right now in the Jenny Sparks comic, that's kind of the Dr. Manhattan. Like, Dr. Manhattan was a look at that character. Rorschach, which a lot of people know from the movie, he kind of became the lead popular character in pop culture. That's a look at The Question, who was an old Steve Ditko from the 60s character. So when you look at all the parallels, it's a commentary, but it also became its own separate thing. So there are people that don't even realize that when you look at the comedian, it's Peacemaker. Now Peacemaker is everyone, but people don't realize that Peacemaker was already kind of satirized and looked at through that
Right.
character. So it's a
Yeah.
fascinating bit of lore.
When did you both read watching
I
for the
was
first
way
time?
too young.
You were too young.
I was
Okay,
way
yeah,
too
yeah.
young to read it. I read it, I believe, in high school.
Okay.
And it was definitely like a way for me to be like, I'm a grown up comic book
Right.
reader.
Yeah.
And it's honestly a really hard read. And I think that's what makes Watchmen, the series, so interesting. Definitely being a young Black girl reading Watchmen, it was not written for me specifically,
right.
right? And I thought it was so interesting back then, we didn't have TikTok. So I was reading Reddit and message boards,
Right.
but I thought it was so very interesting that Rorschach was considered the hero, even reading it, because I feel like Alan Moore goes out of his way to show that that's not someone that should be a hero, right? He stinks. He's eating beans.
it feels like no one's really supposed to be the hero.
No one, and
like,
that's the point, right? Like, even someone who's like has no moral standing, like Dr. Manhattan, and is just a watcher, is letting things happen. Like, even lets Ozymandias, like, perform a terrorist attack. And I think it's interesting that you watch the Zack Snyder version, because the changes that he makes changes the message that the story is trying to tell.
Okay.
And I think that it's interesting. So a couple changes he makes that I thought was really cool. He gives them all super strength.
Okay.
So the comedian, all of them are actual superheroes with superpowers, versus like in the comic book, they're regular men who are vigilantes. And that's why they're kind of immoral and it corrupts them.
Right.
Yeah.
And he also changes the terrorist attack at the end, where it's like a atom bomb.
Yeah, it's
Correct?
it's less comic. There's no squid. There's
Right,
no
right.
perhaps alien giant squid.
Right.
Exactly. Talk
And-
about squid.
But
Yeah,
they
yeah.
changed it for the show. So if you
Right.
noticed, it rained squids,
Yeah.
and that's Ozymandias trying to scare everyone again.
Right.
And like keep that fear of like, there needs to be something bigger to bring us all together.
Right.
That was a Coy, you're rubbing off on me. I just went into
I was
a
just
full
watching with
rant.
pride. I was like, yes,
That was
good.
a coy answer. I was about 15 or 16.
yeah.
And I read a comic book that had no Black people or women in it that weren't like, in a good light. But it taught me a lot about the world and how people are perceived. And it shifted the way that I ingested media, which is crazy.
Yeah.
How old were you, Coy?
I read it for the first time in 8th grade. I understood it for the
Whoa.
first time in 11th
How are you
grade.
not an edgelord?
That's
insane.
What's crazy is I read it in 8th grade, and even then I was like, people like Rorschach? Like, what's interesting is I always say that comics gave me morality. Like, I grew up reading these comics from when I was just piecing one word together to another. But like, I think when you grow up looking at Batman and Batman being like, why am I punching all these people? It
Yeah.
makes you wonder why people do things. So the first time I read Watchmen, I was aware that I wasn't grasping everything. But even then, I could see that it was a commentary on the other characters. I didn't quite know what I was getting, but I was
Yeah.
like, this feels like these aren't the best people, but I didn't get it. And then I remember reading it again in 11th grade and still not quite getting what I get out of it now. But I love that it's a comic you can kind of evolve with as I get older. I look forward to
Yeah.
reading it when I have kids, because I imagine that's going to re-inform how I perceive certain relationships and certain characters that I can't fathom now. So it's one of those books that really ages with you, and I think that's why it's timeless. But
Yeah.
I definitely read it way too young the first time.
It's different now that I'm like in entertainment, and they have this character Silk Spectre.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing, right? How she evolves as a human and as like a hero, but also being a woman.
Right.
And through Rorschach, we see the public perception of her, and like he kind of slut shames her and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Other things I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Is there a character you identify more with as you get older? Like Silk Spectre is a great example, if that's the one. But I identify more with Dr. Manhattan more the older I
Yeah,
get.
no, you identified with
Because
Dr.
like
Manhattan.
that weird detachment from like having too much to do, that weird like overwhelm of
Okay.
like when you're like the idea when I'm a kid of forming multiple me's to get more stuff done was like, why would I work more? But now as I'm like I get older, I'm like, I would love to have 5 me's to reform later. Like there's certain things that I have an image of when I'm busy that like it's so formative that I think of that comic like in life.
Wow. Well,
Maybe that's not healthy.
Dr. Manhattan is nuts. I
Yeah,
gotta
yeah,
say,
yeah.
but
So-
I think that's great. I think that I love that
None
for
of them
you.
are good people, but one of them I identify with.
He's like, so I identify with the god
Yeah, of course.
who isolates himself on Mars. No, I
These
love
aren't
that.
healthy things,
Yeah.
but I will acknowledge them.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I don't know it well enough to
I
like.
mean, you watched the movie,
Oh,
yeah?
it's so long ago though. I didn't really
Okay.
like it very much.
You
I mean,
didn't
I
like it
liked the
very
show
much?
better.
Yeah.
But the show, I mean, even the show was like, I feel like parts of it are over my head.
I feel that.
And I need to go back and rewatch it, revisit it.
I think you would love the show now. So they redid the movie in an animated form. They
Right,
split
yeah.
it. We could talk to Brandon about it when it
Yeah,
comes
yeah.
out. But I would recommend watching those two films because it's the closest adaptation to the comic.
Right, yeah.
And they also have motion comics
Mm-hmm.
for the actual comic books. I like them both. But that's a great way to get a grasp of the story and then rewatch the show.
Right,
And
yeah.
you'd love it. But the show is kind of a sorry for not including you.
Right. I mean, it's sort of a
You know?
response to the.
To the comic
Yeah,
book.
it's not necessarily an adaptation. It's more like it's adapting it, but it's also like interrogating what it all means, which I think is
Yes.
interesting. Like you've talked about, like how Watchmen is sort of responding to the comics and the heroes that came before it, but like, and then it like obviously changed the tone of comics that came after it. But are there like, I mean, are there comics that are extremely inspired by Watchmen and take
The
that? Like,
Watchmen show influence now actual culture and
Yeah.
life culture.
Yeah.
And that's what's so interesting.
yeah, I mean, we
So-
talked about like the Tulsa massacre. Like a lot of people
Exactly.
learned about that from
But
Watchmen.
not just that, it also changed cinematography with the way that they lit Regina King's character, Sister Night. She had on black face paint, black clothing, and we could still see her facial expressions in the night, in the dark. I remember watching that scene and thinking, these directors have been lying to me that black people can't be lit. And seeing what they did with Regina King,
Right.
seeing the storyline they took with Dr. Manhattan and getting Yahya to become him, and then him transferring the power to women. And I think that opened the door for more stories that included people of color. And it wasn't just her, it was women like Laurie, Silk Spectre, regaining her power and becoming like a pivotal character in there. And just looking at characters, these male characters, and deconstructing them, including Rorschach.
Right. Well, I think that that's like, I mean, the best kind of writing to me is when especially when a character is othered in any way. If they're queer, they're black or a different ethnicity, that plays a part in their story. They're not just
Yes.
there and like no one recognizes they're black. Like they
Yes.
know they're black, the other people know that they're black, and like that, the way that they act in the world is so much more interesting and real for that reason. You know?
Agreed. And it grounds the world for sure.
Yeah.
And Tyler, what you were asking a moment ago about if other comics have been like directly influenced. There's actually sequel comics, even like Doomsday Clock, which involves the DC comic characters and their Charlton characters,
Yeah.
and that's really interesting because you're seeing them kind of interact with a version of themselves. But what I think the show does most interestingly is that it modernizes a lot of the same strife that we're dealing with 40 years later. Like a lot of the problems of the 80s are still here today. They have a different bow on them. So
Right.
I really like the show as a commentary on not only the comic, which you were speaking to, like it's a sequel, but it's also acknowledging like we're looking at you. But I think it's looking through a modern lens at how we haven't evolved as much as we should have in 40 years. I think it's really interesting how we look at society and go like, look at how far we've come. But then something like The Watchmen, which was a commentary on how far we hadn't come in the 80s, can now happen in 2020 and go, look how far we haven't come.
Right,
So
yeah.
I think for you especially, this is literally a comic that's one of the time 100 greatest novels, not 100 greatest comics. They put it on their novel list since 1923 to today. That is such an important piece of acknowledgement. So if you look at the show and then go back and read the graphic novel, I think you, being someone that isn't as invested in the physical form of comics, might find that it's influenced novels you've read and
Right,
other things
right.
you've seen. But going from your comfort zone of TV into the comic might be a really cool way for you to like get our world in a different way. And I think that's the power of Watchmen.
And unlike a lot of comic books, this has a beginning and an end.
Right.
And I think
It's not open ended.
it's not open ended. I think you're gonna love it. Honestly, I would reread it with you as well.
All right, maybe
Going
book
to-
club.
We could make a book club.
Also, fun fact, it is dubbed unfilmable and there's multiple adaptations.
Yeah,
so
there've been
I
3
love
now.
the challenge of it. Like
Yeah.
Terry Gilliam was supposed to do it in the 80s.
Once again, the animated movies, part 1 and 2, are so phenomenal.
Is it like, I mean,
it's noir?
yeah.
It's a little darker.
Yeah.
The frame rate looks a little lower.
I did a weird thing because I'm a strange person where I read comics like I'm the director, right? Like like to me, the space between the panels is the thing that makes it interesting. Like what goes from panel 1 to panel 2, you're the writer, you're the director, you're the actor. And I think that's a really special medium to be like, that's why the Doc Manhattan, because I play God. Like I love the moment of like, that's pure
That's why.
creation. But I had fun watching the movie. After reading each issue, I'd watch like a section. So
Yeah.
like I would see how someone else's creative vision mirrored my own or separated from my own. And then I was
Right.
thinking about what they saw the world as and how they perceive not only the comic but the influence of the comic. So it's a really cool thing if you're not as versed in comics to literally go like, how do people see this medium and this art? And it's really something special.
Well, I could talk about Watchmen all day, but speaking of, we have two very important guests. We have actor Katie Sackhoff. She plays Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica. She also played Bo-Katan in the live action and the animated Star Wars. And she voices Poison Ivy in Crisis on Infinite Earth Part 3 and in The Long Halloween. We're also bringing in Brandon Vietti. He is the producer and director of the most faithful adaptation of Watchmen Chapter 1 and 2. He also did incredible work like Young Justice is one of my favorite series and one of, I think, the greatest animated movies of all time, Under the Red Hood. I can't wait to talk to him. And we could talk more Watchmen with him
Yeah.
as well. So let's bring him out. We are back with our two special guests, Katie Sackhoff and Brandon Vietti. And I have to say, Brandon, when I saw you in the green room, I froze. I froze, both of you. I was like, what is going on? I wasn't prepped.
Yeah.
And now I'm looking at Bo-Katan, like one of my favorite directors of all time. It's such a
you.
pleasure. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Yeah. So Brandon, to start off with you, you've made so many animated features and shows. Like, what about the storytelling medium did animation like really speak to you?
Oh, I love animation. It's almost like a Trojan horse. I have trouble describing it, but I think sometimes when people watch animation, you're sort of already categorizing it in your mind as this thing it's a cartoon. It's just fun. But what I love about animation, and especially something like Watchmen, is that you can sneak in these mature themes and like really important stories that have like real, cultural significance and value. And hopefully people might come in, especially those that maybe aren't animation fans. Those are the people I'm always trying to convert. And maybe they'll find something that takes them by surprise. That this thing that they sort of categorized as a thing that was just a fun thing for kids, maybe. Oh my gosh, I got so much out of this. I forgot that I was watching a cartoon.
Right.
So I think, through my career, through many of the projects I've been very lucky to work on with Warner Brothers Animation and for DC in particular, I've really enjoyed trying to kind of get that trick in there where we, get something in there that's very meaningful and mature and advances the animation medium and takes people by surprise.
Well, you definitely did your big one with Watchmen Chapter 1 and 2. And I love to hear that you want to convert fans into animation because I definitely think you're doing that. Now, Katie, were you familiar with Watchmen when you jumped on the project?
I was, in the sense that my brother had graphic novels and comic books growing up, and I was always, in the very beginning of my sort of relationship with comics, I would lean toward the stereotypical girl comic books. I would lean toward the Betty and Veronica books and things like that. And then, I would get bored and my brother would have more, and then I started grabbing his books, and Watchmen was one of them. It sort of felt like it was something that you shouldn't have had.
Yeah.
And it felt like you were like reading something that your parents got for you, but they didn't actually open it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there was a sort of clandestine feeling to it when I looked at it the first time, and I remember being blown away and just like, what is this? And then ultimately I stepped away from it for many years until this came about, and I went back and looked at it again, and I just remember being again just blown away by it, and just it's such a phenomenal story. It's such a complicated story.
Absolutely. And you play Silk Spectre, who has one of the most complicated, I think, storylines. How was that, taking on that character and bringing her to life?
Amazing. I mean, I jumped at the opportunity, and for me, it was trying to not compare my performance to what has come before. That was the biggest thing, but to find what I could bring to the story that felt different. And I really just thought about her. I thought about her relationships. I thought about her pain. I thought about the struggles, what it would be like to be her. And ultimately, the thing that I sort of landed on was that there's an intense vulnerability to her that I think is completely separate from her strength and her capability. And for me, that was the thing that I just wanted to always be present, was just her level of sadness and disappointment and the weight of every relationship in her life. And then when I go back and look at the graphic novel now, I can't look at a frame with her in it without seeing her sadness. It's so weird.
You can hear it in your performances. And there are moments in the two films that I feel like I'm not even watching animation. It's really, really good.
I left John.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I'm sorry to dump this on you. But you don't know what it's like living with him. For him, the real world is like walking through mist, and all the people are just shadows.
I love what you did directing wise with it because it felt objective. And Tyler, that's the biggest thing about Watchmen is there is no heroes.
Right.
So how do you you want to root for Laurie, you want her to be the hero of the story, but they're all flawed. And I think you did such an incredible job of just showing the story. This is the story. Is it bad? Is it good? You know?
In that same vein, perception of characters is such a huge part of the experience of being in it, but also watching it, and that's something that evolves over time. Is there any perception of a character that's changed for either of you, having been so immersed in this world over time, or any perception of actions characters did that's changed for you actually working with the story itself as opposed to experiencing the story?
That's a great question. I think, I'm going to talk about Laurie for a little bit because I think for all of us, Laurie came out of the story more than I think my original readings, multiple readings of the book. I think she really came to the forefront, especially with Katie's performance, kind of picking up on the sadness that you did. But also, there's such an emotional roller coaster ride that comes through with that character. I think Laurie has the greatest amount of ups and downs through the story emotionally than many of the other characters, and you start to gravitate to that. And that's not something you necessarily pick up, I think, when you're reading, because you don't have Katie's performance, helping you in your mind, or even through some of the filmmaking or the animation that we've got to kind of really bring alive that emotional arc. So I think for a lot of us, and even our animation crews overseas, they gravitated to Laurie. I just happened to notice that a lot of the shots that were coming back from our animation studio, Studio Mirror, because they could feel it, even though this is a Korean animation studio. Many of the staff there may not speak English, but they're getting through your performance because they're hearing your performance, and they're looking at the storyboards, but they're getting the emotion through Katie's performance. And they're getting that into the animation, and you could tell they were putting a lot of care into that. It really spoke to them. So I think, to answer your question, I think Laurie was, I don't think a surprise, but I think she came forward more than I thought and really felt like, to some degree, the main character.
You definitely gave her autonomy that sometimes you can't read. And to your point, that sadness, we don't know how Laurie feels really in the comic book, but now she has a personality. We know where she's coming from. We know how she feels with all of these crazy things with dating Dr. Manhattan. And I mean, bravo to both of you. Now you both are in, arguably some of the toughest fandoms to be in. I don't know how you do it.
This is what happens when you're a fan of genre, and I just continue to ask my team, I'm like, what other genre work is out there?
Yeah.
And I think ultimately it's my dad raised me on this stuff, and I feel like now I gravitate toward projects that my dad would want to watch in this weird way. And so I think that, when you have a career that is so like genre based, you're bound to end up in some big fandoms where, fans are,
People be crazy.
they're passionate.
How do you both manage expectations for fans? You took some of the biggest stories and animated them, and people loved it. Like, for people to love Under the Red Hood, they go out their way to hate it, and no one hates your adaptation. And the same for you, the performances that you brought on are so iconic that people go out their way to be like, I don't know if it's good. No bad words. Nothing bad. The both of you, how do you manage those expectations?
I think we're trying to, because we love this stuff, make something that feels right to us as fans of the material. And we just know, because I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I've read a lot of comments and feedback, and you just can't please everybody, and you just have to be okay with that, and just come at it and do the best you can to do it the way you see fit, and just hope everybody digs it.
I think the biggest thing for me is just to, because I'm a fan of it, I make the story that I enjoy. I make the story that I feel, and I try not to make everybody happy, because the problem is, and I learned this during Battlestar, the more I read comments, and granted, it was real hard to read comments during Battlestar. The internet just existed.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you'd go
You
down.
had to really search for it.
You had to go to the internet cafe, buy 30 minutes, find a chat group, search your name in the chat group. It was not easy. And I just learned that the more I looked at the negativity or tried to make people happy, the more it changed my performance, and it no longer became my performance anymore. And then I wasn't comfortable in the character anymore, and I had to learn to just turn it off and deliver the performance that myself and the creators and the director and the writers feel is the important story to tell. And then if people don't like it, they don't like it. Ultimately, what we're creating is art. Art is subjective. People can look at the same painting and have vastly different interpretations of it, and that's what we're doing. And so you're never going to have something for everyone, and that's the thing I just try to remember.
Speaking of interpretation, something I think is really interesting. You mentioned that you kind of avoided other versions of your character, but on the show, Silk Spectre, you kind of share that character with another voice actor, Adrienne Barbeau, also famous in the DC world. Are you able to communicate or collaborate with her ahead of time, or is it kind of just an isolated experience as a voice actor?
As a voice actor, people ask this all the time. I think it's a very lonely existence. It's very solitary.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll get to experience a piece of what someone else has done, and but for the most part, you're by yourself and with the director. And I think that's one of the things I love so much about animation. It's a vast collaboration just between the two of us, really.
Right.
And because he is the maestro, he's the one putting everything together and making sure that it fits, and so you just have to have a level of trust in someone. But it would have been amazing, right, to have those conversations.
Does that make you more of an audience member than when you watch the final project than if you're on set, you remembering the scenes that you were against with someone?
Absolutely, because you have the ability to take a step back and be completely objective.
Yeah.
And just watch it as an audience member, which is so great.
Now, Watchmen's an oddly timeless story, considering how specifically it was written for 1986 and a lot of the specificity, but the themes are oddly more applicable today, it seems like, as we're living through our generation of this. But how do each of you see some of the elements as more or differently applicable to today's society? Because the story, I find every generation finds new things in it. How do you think some of those elements are different in 2025 than they were in 86?
I mean, some of the elements are just scary the same. I mean, talking about, one of the things that's so amazing about the craftsmanship of the book is how they worked in media and newspaper headlines and world events that were going on, all of which was so important to the story. And I'm, trying to, with my team, translate these newspaper designs, all these headlines about a Russian invasion, and the exact same thing is happening in the headlines as we're making these headlines for the book. We're almost word for word matching headlines that we were seeing in the world around us as we're making the movie. And there are so many layers like that of not just world events, but I mean, I think following Dan and Lori, the sense of isolation that they have, and that sense of, trying to figure out who they are behind the mask, now that they've, trying to like carve out new lives for themselves, separate from the one that they led before. These are all like timeless themes, honestly. And I think, are very relevant today. I mean, we're seeing a lot of headlines about that today too, about loneliness just sort of being a common problem in our society, but for different reasons than maybe in the 80s. So just a couple examples of things that, are everything old is new again, and that was, I think, another one of the incredible things that Alan Moore achieved in his story writing this book.
I'd also love to hear how Dave Gibbons was involved, because I feel like the power of Dave Gibbons' art and how much he's loved this world and things going forward. How and like in what ways did you collaborate, and did you learn anything from working with him and talking with him?
Dave was incredibly supportive to us throughout this process. We had some great conversations early on, and I think he was really encouraging us to kind of find our own way of telling the story. I think I was really chasing him in the beginning, and also Straczynski, who wrote this, James Straczynski, our writer, who kind of translated the original story for us and found a much better structure that worked for a movie format. I think we both really wanted to know like every possible detail that did or didn't make it into the book, so that we could try to bring that to life. And I think Dave was more encouraging to kind of like, well, you've got the gist of it in the book. Look at those materials and make your own version of that, which I think was really helpful, because number one, I mean, there's just no way that we could get all of that great material from the book into our movie. And so having Dave say that to us, it gave us some freedom. At the same time, we were very much trying to capture Dave Gibbons' artwork in every single detail as we translated his designs into 3D animation. I mean, we really wanted you to forget that this was 3D, honestly, because I always thought of this as a period piece. This was a story written in the 80s, set in the 80s, published in the 80s, and we wanted our animation to feel like it could come from the 80s, but of course, there was no 3D animation then. But we tried every trick in the book that we could as we were adapting Dave Gibbons' artwork into 3D models to give you that sense of a paper texture that was in the original comic book. It was originally printed on very pulpy paper. So if you look very closely at the characters, you'll kind of see that baked into the skin texture is sort of a paper pulp texture. Even the ink lines on the character faces, our art director, Jonathan Hoekstra, actually was able to capture an ink stroke from Dave Gibbons and use that as a guide for all of the ink strokes that were applied to all of the characters, their faces, their clothing, even the background, so that you have an ink line that has like a ragged edge to it. So it looks like ink that has sunk into the tooth of Bristol board paper, which is what they often draw comics on. So you get what feels like an actual ink line on paper. And when you get really close to the characters, on the CG characters, you can see that ink line and it feels like pen on paper. So that's a couple examples, but everything we tried to do was chasing a Dave Gibbons drawing and try to make it feel like Dave Gibbons drew this animated movie.
That's so literally and metaphorically his stamp of approval. That's beautiful, man.
I'm surprised that you said it was 3D animation. I didn't even know. It reads like 2D animation, and it reads like something very, I don't want to call it vintage, but it's vintage.
I love the idea of just animation having texture to it,
Yeah.
to remind that it is kind of a living, breathing thing in the same way.
And there's two animation styles in there. You also animate the comic book within this comic book as well, right?
That's right. Yeah, I hired Francesco Francavilla, who's a legendary comic book artist working today, and really good at drawing things that are kind of horrific, like psychological horror in particular, I think is a strong suit for him. One of my favorite artists, and so I wanted him to do the Black Freighter story for us, which is the comic book within the Watchmen comic. And his style, I thought, really captured comics that were being printed at the time in the 80s, kind of had an old school comic book style, which is what the Black Freighter is supposed to be. And so I thought that was a good contrast that worked best in animation to be able to incorporate the Black Freighter comic books in close-ups. Like our camera, if you will, is actually floating over the real comic book read by a 3D character in our animated world. So you get this contrast, this visual contrast of like cutting back and forth between a graphic comic book panel on a page and then the CG character in the animated world. I think those two things cut back and forth more successfully than if you were to use like a live action person reading an actual comic. So that was a big, stylistic goal, I think, for me to try to, again, capture the Watchmen story in a way that couldn't be done in other mediums by leaning into the strengths of being able to cut back and forth between comic book art and animation. I think it's a really unique sort of editing device or visual device to tell the story. And so that was one of many ways we were trying to make our telling of the Watchmen unique. Yeah. Hopefully our movie will be like a gateway for people that maybe didn't know there was a comic book. Hopefully this will lead them to that. And as you read it, you'll never get all the details in the first reading. I think anybody who knows this book already, who's already a fan, knows that you're going to read it once and then you're going to read it again because you know you missed stuff. And certainly there's going to be more and more stuff there with every additional read. I can't tell you how many times I read this book through the making of this, trying to just I just need to go back and reference this one thing. What is that? I did not notice this detail.
Did
in
you
the
have
background
like a script version of it? Like I'm thinking of like Francis Ford Coppola when he adapted The Godfather. He had like this. He like ripped up his copy of it and basically like added notes everywhere and just knew exactly where everything in the book should end up on film. Was that something that is that part of a process for you at all?
in a digital way.
Yeah.
I mean, I had
Not good analog,
Yeah,
70s
yeah.
way. Yeah.
Certainly did, yeah, and that made it easier having it, digitally, so I could put pages, whether they were just written like the script or the actual comic. There wasn't a single day during the production that I didn't have a digital version of the comic open, and I could quickly flip to what I was looking for. But inevitably, like I said, I would always find some detail in the background I didn't catch before. And anytime I would find that, I would very often try to incorporate it into the movie. So, I mean, hopefully our movie has that secondary watch value or third, hopefully as you go through it, you'll keep finding more and more little details that are hidden, like the hidden happy faces. Like that's something I always loved about what Dave Gibbons, drew into the comic panels was the hidden happy face. Some of them were very obvious. Some of them were very subtle. We did that in our movie. Some are going to hit you in the face. You're going to see them right away. Others are extremely subtle, maybe only on there for a few frames, but they're there. And we did that so that you'd have that sort of treasure hunt experience that I had when I read the book originally.
Now, Katie, you didn't have any of the animation influencing your performance. You were just in the booth reading it. Mm-hmm. Wow. Where did you get that nuanced take? Like, where did you get that performance from?
I think it comes down to the words on the page and then understanding the story. And what I don't understand, asking questions. I think that's really important. But like I said, if you look at the relationships that Laurie has, and you look at the complication of each one of those relationships and how they form who she is and how they form how she heads into the next relationship, it's really heavy. Mm-hmm. If I have that story in me as I'm telling the story with my mouth, like with my vocal cords or whatever, my words, it can't help but have a piece of it in there. Mm-hmm. You can't help but have it in there. Every conversation she has with John, there's pain. And we can all identify with that pain. I think that every single person has loved someone who wasn't capable of giving them what they needed. It's an incredibly sad thing, especially if you've lived it personally. And so every scene she had with him, I wanted that to be there. So yeah, I think it's once you understand the words that you're saying and you understand the relationships, you don't need to see the animation because it's in your head. I
explained, I think, like some of the acting bits that we were going to do. In particular, there's like the thing with the fists.
Yes.
Like, anytime she gets frustrated, upset, her hands just unconsciously kind of go into fists, which kind of calls back to when she was younger. That was kind of her power place, was she was on the street using her fists, And so that's kind of her go-to place in her adult life now that she's no longer Silk Spectre. And she can't ball up the fists and fight anything anymore. She's just constantly getting hit by life around her. And she has actually found a way to sort of pivot so that she's not always down. She catches herself being down. And this is what I love about Laurie is that, and this is written in the book and very well captured through performance, is she does know when she's down and she pivots to try to find a way out of it. And that is a strength that not every character has, to know when you're in that low place and then pivot and try to find a way out.
Because she doesn't want it to be her, like she's very aware of where she is, and she's desperately trying to have it not define her and get out of it.
And I think that scene where you finally do get to use your fist in that alleyway, you both capture it so greatly, where you almost feel like you're back at home. You're like, oh yes, finally I could throw hands again. Which I mean, we're gonna get you full into
It's gonna
Watchmen,
happen.
but I think some of it is definitely, to your points earlier. Everyone reads Watchmen way too early.
Right.
Way too early. And there's this mystery that comes with it, but it's all of the characters where we see them change and we see them kind of revert to their old ways and kind of enjoy it. You know what I mean? We've been so excited to have you both here. Watchmen Chapter 1 and 2 is incredible, and both of you have contributed so much to the fandom. So we wanted to thank you.
DC was always a part of my life growing up, and I think just like, superheroes in general, and I love, like we were talking about, genre work. I now have a 3-year-old daughter, and we were at a library sale probably like a year ago now, and in the box there was a DC Supergirls comic, and I pulled it out and it was like 25 cents, and I was like, sure, this looks like a 3-year-old could read this. And I grabbed it, and she went full on. She is like, all she asked Santa for Christmas was DC Supergirls dolls, which I had to go on eBay and find. Like, all she wants to play is Wonder Woman. She calls herself Wendy. She wants to fight bad guys all the time. Mommy's Poison Ivy, which I also find ironic. So it's like I played Poison Ivy. She made us dress up like superheroes, like for Halloween. Like, she was Wonder Woman. Dad was Superman. She made her little chunky brother the Flash, which she also found hysterical. And Mom was Poison Ivy, which finding a costume that is like appropriate
as
for like
Poison Ivy.
kids, and also in the Pacific Northwest where it was pouring rain was like not easy. But DC is like a part of my life every single day now, because this child wakes up every morning and she's like, let's go play Wonder Woman. She's like, let's go beat bad guys up. So we're in. We are so in. She's just like, it's so fun to like see the characters through the eyes of a 3-year-old, because she just falls. I mean, she sees them at on such a basic level. But every single one of them is strong. And it's just, God, as a mom of a little girl, it's just like the coolest thing ever.
I love that passing of the torch so much, from your dad to you to your daughter. My dad gave me Watchmen, so like, and that's how I think of it when I read it. So I think the nature of this world and this mythology we've given to the next generation is so special.
So now I'm like playing characters like that my daughter can watch. I'm like,
That's so sweet.
what do we do now?
Layers of Poison Ivy. It's so special.
Wait, your dad gave you Watchmen at 13?
Yeah.
What? I kept it a
You've met
secret from my dad.
He was like, all right, time to learn.
Now, is there anywhere you would like our viewers and listeners to look for projects for you or to follow you?
I mean, all the things.
And what about you, Brandon? Is there anywhere you would like our viewers to find you?
You can easily find me on X and Blue Sky, and those are the two I visit the most. So, yeah.
And ask you a bunch of questions.
Sure. Always happy. Sure.
Thank you for Death in the Family, The Red Hood, the Jackie Chan
Young
show,
Justice.
the Spider-Man show with Neil Patrick Harris, for this. Thank you for my childhood, adulthood. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll never forgive you for killing Kid Flash, but you're still our favorite. So thank you.
Thank you very
guys.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you both for joining us. That was a great interview, but before we wrap things up, let's do our showcase spotlight.
This spotlight, one of my favorite movies from last year, also a Max original with a couple DC Universe stars in it. Juror Number 2, Clint Eastwood's legal thriller starring Nicholas Holtz, who obviously will be playing Lex Luthor. Also, it's like an old-fashioned 90s kind of like legal thriller. And it could be quite possibly Clint Eastwood's last movie, which I'm not prepared to acknowledge yet, but go watch it on Max.
We'll watch it, not saying it's his
Yeah.
final. I want to put a spotlight on Young Justice since we brought it up. I love that show. It went on for a couple seasons, and it was just such a great look into becoming a superhero and what that means. It had a huge roster, and it's one of the only comic book adaptations I've ever seen where when characters die, they're dead. And it was crazy to like watch the entire audience be in denial for so long.
Right.
And to know that like, oh, there are actual repercussions. So
Right.
that's definitely my push.
I'm going to save my spotlight for Alan Moore's Swamp Thing for another episode, but know that I'm thinking of it. I want to put a spotlight on animation and Batman Beyond, because I feel like Batman Beyond in this sweatshirt. I feel like I'm Terry McGinnis about to do some stuff. Batman Beyond, I think, is one of the most advanced for its age in both its viewership and of its time animated shows. I think it really caught the zeitgeist at just the right time, and I feel like I'm curious what Gen Z and Gen Alpha think of Batman Beyond. So I'd love to find out, like, our demo loved it. I'd really love to see, like, kids today discover Batman Beyond. So I'd love to hear what people are thinking and to read the comments about it. So Batman Beyond is my spotlight. It's on Max. It is such a great take on an alternate Batman. And in a world of Elseworlds, discover your favorite, and Batman Beyond's one of mine.
Well, thank you all for joining us for another episode of DC Studio Showcase. You can catch new episodes every other Friday anywhere podcasts are available, or you can watch us on Max's YouTube, or you can catch us on Spotify. You can see our pretty faces.
And if you want to read the comics we talked about and more comics, you can head over to the DC Universe Infinite app. That is DC's incredible array, their massive catalog of comic books, including Swamp Thing. Head over there, read some comics, and also check out your local comic book shop.
And as always, if you guys at home have any comments, suggestions, or just want to connect with us, you can comment on Max's YouTube page under the episodes, or you can reach out to us directly. We are very friendly. You can find me on all social media platforms at Fantastic Frankie, FRANKEY.
I am on Instagram and Blue Sky under my name, Tyler Coates.
You can find me on Instagram and YouTube at Koyjandreau, COYJANDREAU.
If you made it this far, you must love us. So please let us know, like and subscribe, and also leave us some great 5-star reviews.
Well, thank you all for joining us. I'm nerd commentator Frankie Smith,
And I'm entertainment journalist Tyler Coates.
I'm comic correspondent Koyjandreau.
and this is DC Studio Showcase. We'll see you next time.
This was an OBB sound production for Max and DC Studios, hosted by Frankie Smith, Tyler Coates, with comic correspondent Koyjandreau. Executive producers for DC Studios, Phil Soponides and Gary Barbosa. Executive producers for DC are Mike Pilata and Victor Diaz. The executive producer for Max is Becky Rowe, and producers for Max are Savon Slater and Margaret Kelly. The executive producers for OBB are Michael Ratner, Scott Ratner, Arlen Konopacki, and Toby Lawless. Research producer Sam Harrison. Production manager Kevin Lynn, and the studio coordinator Elijah Matias. The director of photography Heath Gresham. The first assistant camera Chris Piper. The camera operator Ben Cohen. Gaffer Arthur Garcia. Key grip Sam Satowski. Key grip Alessandro Picasso. Production designer Francesca Maldonado. Set director Oscar Huezo. Lead man Camilo Castana. Sound mixer and editor Josh Falcon. On-set mixer Darren Bowler. Composer Ethan Walter of The Ringers. Post-production supervisor Mariana Chrysostomum. Editor Jesse Holland. Assistant editor Mark Alcacid. Hair and makeup artist Kendall Shannon. Our associate director of social for OBB Lenore Castro. Senior coordinator social for OBB Sharif Bukhari. Host coaching John Luce. Talent booker Tess Bartholomew. Production assistant Terry Kraft. Antonio Cavallo.